We're going to go to our next speaker now, who is coming from another part of the world. So we have, we have joining us Emilio Velis. So Emilio came as a speaker in a roundtable that the Fab City Foundation hosted in 2022. This roundtable was around the idea of digital ecosystems and how we can document our work as a community. So Emilio is the Executive Director of Appropedia Foundation, and he's going to talk to us about a very different kind of platform, which I think you will start to understand, what we're building in terms of a narrative around the kinds of digital infrastructures that are involved in a Fab City network. Hi, Emilio.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can. The floor is yours.
All right, let me see. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, thanks so much. I want to begin by thinking about the goals that we all have in mind when we think about Fab City and the work with different actors. And to me, this image from a workshop that was done by UNDP in El Salvador at some communities on the beach really describes it. This was an activity where people were looking at Appropedia pages about their own communities and the technologies, the grassroots technologies that were mapped there. This is how these pages look like. A nonprofit called Techo went all over beachfront communities to ask them how they gathered filtered water, and then they developed this small compendium, and then it was given back to them. So I wanted to bring this idea of ecosystem in a complex sense by thinking about how we collaborate with all these stakeholders, that some of them are divided by this gap in, we can call it digital literacy, we can call it access, but who also have solutions and the willingness to solve problems in their own communities. And to bridge all of those complexities, I was thinking of three ideas. The first one is, how do we enable that collaboration? Second, how do we continue thinking about the relevance of maker culture and how we can avoid being distracted by only the space of the digital, but go back and make the things that we need to make and create the impact that we need to create. And then finally, using that, the knowledge, the data as a shared language that can be understood by machines, by individuals of all types. So regarding the first one, I wanted to think about the practical uses of the digital within an ecosystem. And some of the actions that we have been thinking about on Appropedia have to do with building those capacities for using digital tools like Appropedia or others, and then thinking about the switch between online and offline when thinking about the information. How do we bring in information into a platform, but then how do we go back, bring it back, or how do we teach people how to create those ideas into usable information? And then closing that information loop so that it goes back and we don't become an extractive industry, which happens very often, where we just go into a place, take all this information and then bring it back, put it into a walled garden. So some of the activities that we've been doing right now have to do with training on how to do documentation. The first image on top is a class that I did recently for the critical making program about what is the value of doing good documentation and practices. So we've been reproducing some of these with other actors. And then on the bottom is a resource that we're co-developing with the UNDP Accelerator Labs to teach people good practices of documenting on the field. So how do we send teams of people either from United Nations organizations or from nonprofits to go in, grab this information, and then bring it back in a way that can create value in the digital realm. So in that way, we are creating this collaboration that spans not only people within the digital ecosystem, but also people who are solving the problems that we all want to solve. And these are some of the activities that we have been doing. And as you can see, there's a lot of work in the digital and then outside. A lot of information comes to live on Apropedia, but then is printed and sent back to the communities, etc. So lots of testing, lots of work with different actors. Then secondly, thinking about how to maintain the relevance of maker culture and to think about how everything that we're doing is to build things that make sense for solutions to practical problems like climate change or production locally. And for that, we need information to live on digital platforms for a long time. And we think a lot on Apropedia about how we can guarantee that this knowledge will live on, even if Apropedia ceases to exist, or how we collaborate with other platforms to create redundancy, then how this knowledge can be usable and how that knowledge in the end is practical. It solves practical problems. So the two things have to do with thinking of documentation and knowledge as something that's living and that happens over time. And then secondly, keeping the life of these projects by remixing and making, by going out, encouraging people to create and not only live on the digital realm. And this is one example of a really cool project that we have on Apropedia that for over 3 years, we had different teams. One was a master's project of building a COVID-related filter using a fan. And they finished the documentation. And then next year, a different team came in of students and turned it into a solar solution for the fires in California. So that's a second one. And then the third one is a project done by students in El Salvador on building a business model based on these solutions. So thinking about how can we build upon and explore and fork and remix is one way of seeing these projects and these ideas evolve over time. And one of the focuses that we have on Apropedia is thinking about how we can create these narratives around what happens over time, what worked, what did not work. And about this really cool example shows the so-called triangle of death, which is a space in the high school where students came in. It's called a triangle of death because everything that they plant there dies because of the many people who cross every day. And it took them like over 10 years to solve the problem and to find what could make the plants not die, etc. So we can think about the things that did not work, the things that worked, and this longevity and this focus on narratives is really important, and we have to think about them because we're humans and we think in terms of stories over time. And then finally, how can we create a shared language when we think about the technical aspects of the documentation of data? And one idea is to use digital tools to communicate effectively, to use shared technical language, and how do we interact? So we have on one side, we have creating narratives in a way that are relevant, how documentation can tell a story. But then on the other side, we can think of how we can create tools, for example, for machine learning or for certification using metadata, which we can talk about some other time. But for now, I just wanted to mention how can we extend the work and working with different platforms, creating this loop between the digital and the physical, and then integrating all these with other platforms who are doing the same work to not reinvent the wheel. And then finally, I wanted to show you this example of how this all comes together, which is through the Global Surgical Training Challenge, which was a competition that we collaborated with alongside all these other organizations, and it was funded by Intuitive Foundation. These are the two winners of the competition. The first winner won $700,000 for creating a module comprised of a simulator that people could build to perform a specific surgical procedure. And it was low cost. It used digital technology, but also physical, that you could either make by hand or using digital fabrication. And then on the right is tibial fracture fixation model that we did a workshop in Bali as well. And then how we created the opportunity for people to take all of these designs, reproduce them, and test how well they were applicable to teaching specific surgical skills, so people could practice. And then the main idea of this is that Apropedia serves as one of the spaces in the digital realm, and people have their own platforms. We serve as a sandbox for people to come in, document, but then they work on their own platform. So we want to think that we're like the space for training to create new platforms and interact with them. But from that idea, what we are building right now is an ecosystem of modules created by different surgical practitioners and educators around the world called SELF. And the idea is that people can create their own syllabi, and they can take from all these different resources that live on Apropedia and outside of Apropedia to teach surgical training. So in the end, what we want to think about is how can we take all this knowledge, put it together, and then bring in something that creates value. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Emilio. Thank you for joining us all the way from El Salvador. This is really our pleasure to host you online. We hope next time also in person.